What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the TCL 20XE. Now before we go any further, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot. But with that being said, let's get started. So the TCL 20XE has a 6.52-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 269, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. We got a water drop notch up here for the front-facing camera, and this camera is 5 megapixels. So overall, this display is definitely pretty good quality, especially for an entry-level phone. Even though the specs are pretty much the same as every other phone in this price range, the actual display in reality does look a lot better in my opinion. I do have the brightness at 100% right now, and for just being a regular 720p LCD display that you would find on a really entry-level phone, it looks really bright and the colors look really nice. So overall, if you're doing any kind of content consumption, this display will definitely get the job done. Now, in addition to this, at 6.52 inches, it's not the biggest display you can get, but at the same time, it's still going to give you a real good experience, and the tall and narrow form factor is going to be great for streaming videos in landscape mode. And if you're reading, you'll be able to fit more on the screen without scrolling. And at the same time, despite giving you the benefits of having a larger display for content consumption, it's also not so large that it's uncomfortable to hold or carry in your pocket. So all around for what it is, the display is not only really good quality, but it's also pretty much the perfect size. Now for storage, we're getting 32 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion. This is a pretty standard amount of storage for an entry-level phone in this price range, so it's not too surprising. But at the same time, keep in mind that 32 gigabytes really isn't a whole lot. Even for the average user, I do recommend getting a microSD card with this phone because you're probably going to go through 32 gigabytes pretty quickly. Now with the microSD card, you can at least offload photos and videos, and that does make things a bit easier. But if you're a power user and you have a bunch of apps and stuff like that, you're going to be better off looking at a different phone that has more internal storage. But for everyone else, if you're just doing more basic and more average activities on your phone, and you're not putting a whole lot of apps and stuff like that on it, you should be able to get by just fine, especially if you have a microSD card. Now there's no wireless charging with this phone, but we are getting a fingerprint scanner right here on the rear, and face unlock as well. It's nice that this phone has both options, because while that's not uncommon, there are still plenty of phones out there that only have a fingerprint scanner or face unlock, not both. Even the iPhone 13 doesn't have a fingerprint scanner, so it's definitely nice to have both options just in case you're in a situation where you can't use one, and then the other can take over. But we're gonna go ahead and give the fingerprint scanner a try and see how well it works. There we go, one more time. And there we go. Real fast and responsive, no issues here. And in case you were wondering, this is how Face Unlock works. And there you go, it pretty much works instantly. So both the fingerprint scanner and Face Unlock work really well on this phone. I really have no complaints. Now taking a look at the rear camera setup, we got a triple camera here with a 13 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. So definitely a pretty decent setup. Unfortunately, there's no ultra-wide camera, but at least we're getting a depth sensing camera so we can use portrait mode. And there's the macro camera too, so it's not too big a deal. I just think an ultra-wide camera is such a useful feature. And compared to a macro camera, I feel like a wider range of people can use an ultra-wide camera and get value out of it. Whereas with a macro camera, it's really more of a niche feature that I feel like a lot of people don't really even care about. So I personally would choose an ultra-wide camera over a macro camera. But of course, not everybody uses ultra-wide cameras either. So if that's not a feature that matters to you, then of course, this phone not having an ultra-wide camera really isn't going to affect you all that much. Now to give you an idea of what this phone's camera can do, this is a photo taken with the main camera. And for an entry-level phone, I do think this phone can take some real nice photos. The details, the colors, everything looks really sharp. Now, is this going to be able to take photos around the level of a $1,000 flagship phone? No, of course not. I wouldn't expect to do any professional photography or anything like that with this phone. But if you're just taking a few nice photos here and there for social media, then this camera will definitely get the job done. Now this photo was taken with portrait mode. Like the photo taken with the main camera, This photo is really impressive, the colors and details look really good, and the photo itself is really bright too. That is one thing I notice with a lot of entry-level phones. The brightness usually isn't the best, but with this phone, we're not getting that issue. So that's a really nice thing to see. So again, based on this, if you're planning on taking photos for social media or something like that, I know portrait mode is real popular for stuff like Instagram. This phone is going to be a great option for that. Now, this photo was taken with the macro camera. Now, I'm not usually a big fan of macro cameras, especially macro cameras from entry-level phones, because to be perfectly honest, very few of them actually take good photos. But I do think this phone is one of those few because the photo turned out real nicely. The details are surprisingly sharp and vivid, the colors look nice, and even the lighting is good. So overall, I know the macro camera isn't really the most widely used feature out there, but if you do want a macro camera to get those real close-up sharp details, this phone's macro camera is going to be better than most phones in this price range. Now for video, this phone can shoot in up to 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so nothing out of the ordinary there. Now internally, the TCL 20XC is getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio P22 processor. I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on the phone, and it came back with a single core score of 152 and a multi-core score of 862. Now, by themselves, Geekbench 5 benchmark test scores don't really mean a whole lot unless you have something to compare them to. So I recommend running a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on your current phone and comparing the scores to these to see if this phone would be an upgrade for you. But I will say, as I've been using this phone, I haven't had any performance issues, and everything has been running really smoothly. Now, when it comes to performance, I wouldn't expect to do any high-end activities on this phone, so intense mobile gaming, stuff like that, maybe video editing, things that take up a lot of processing power, this phone is probably going to struggle with that because it's really not meant for that type of activity. But if you're just doing more normal activities, like sending text messages, making calls, browsing the web, that sort of thing, and some light to moderate social media use, in that situation, you'll be just fine, and I wouldn't expect to have any issues there. Now for the battery, this phone is getting a 5000 mAh battery, so this is definitely a large battery. You're gonna get tons of battery life throughout the day. In fact, this battery is gonna last multiple days. And the cool thing about that is that since you're starting out with way more battery life than you need, down the road as the battery degrades, which all batteries do, you're not going to notice it affecting your day-to-day activities nearly as quickly as you would with a smaller battery. Now, another thing about this phone to keep in mind is that there's no NFC, which isn't too surprising because not very many phones in this price range have NFC. But in case you don't know, NFC is the main technology behind contactless mobile payment services like Google Pay. So if you do use that feature a lot, just know that since this phone doesn't have NFC, you won't be able to use Google Pay. So now that we've gone over some of the specs of the phone, let's take a closer look at the actual device itself. So on the left side here, we got the slot for the SIM card and the micro SD card. On the bottom, we got the microphone, a USB-C port, and the speaker. On the right side, we got our power key, volume down, volume up. On the top, we got a noise canceling microphone and a 3.5mm headphone jack. And on the back, we got our camera setup, our flash, and the fingerprint scanner. The back has a matte finish that looks pretty nice. It doesn't really pick up fingerprints too much, although you can see them in certain lighting. Overall, I really like the design of this phone. It looks really sleek and modern, and everything feels so well built. It has a lot of weight to it, making it feel a little bit more premium, and the materials feel really solid too. A lot of the time I've noticed in entry-level phones like this, the buttons end up being a little flimsy, but with this phone that's not the case at all. These buttons feel real solid. So overall, if you're looking for an entry-level phone, but you want it to have a more solid premium feel, this phone is going to be a great option. So in conclusion, my general thoughts about the TCL 20XE. For what it is, I do think this is actually a really impressive phone. It has a great display that, despite having pretty much the normal specs of an entry-level phone, honestly looks much better than most phones in its price range. It has a really good camera setup, a decent processor, a really large battery, and overall a really nice looking design. And it has some nice weight to it as well. So if you're looking for a solid, well-built entry-level phone that has a good amount of features, a good display, a nice camera, and a really large battery, then the TCL 20XE is going to be a great option. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And as always, I will see you in the next video.